In 1953, a widow in Barnsley could feed herself for an entire week on 1 shilling and 9 pence. Think about that for a moment. One small coin purse, one cooking pot, one ring on the stove, and she managed not just to survive, but to eat properly. Warm meals, filling meals, honest meals. In many ways, she probably ate better than most of us do today. The dishes on this list cost pennies to make. They created barely any washing up, and they were designed for a very specific kind of life. One person, one kitchen, one quiet home where the kettle and the wireless provided most of the background noise. These were not struggle meals. They were thoughtful, practical, carefully perfected recipes. Number 18 on this list was actually recommended by district nurses in the 1960s because it contained nearly every nutrient an older body needed. And number 7 was so inexpensive that even during rationing, almost no one had to go without it. These 25 meals were refined by women who cooked alone after the war had taken their husbands, after children moved south for work, after houses that were once noisy grew still. 1. The principle behind them all. The real number 1 on this list isn't a recipe. It isn't a specific ingredient. It isn't something you can measure in ounces or pennies. It's a mindset. It's the quiet decision to feed yourself properly even when nobody is watching, even when no one would notice if you skipped a meal or settled for tea and biscuits instead. Cooking for one is not a lesser version of cooking. It's not something to rush or dismiss. It is its own discipline, its own quiet kind of strength. There's dignity in standing at the stove for yourself, in peeling the potato, in stirring the pot, in setting a plate at a table meant for one. Try one of these meals this week. Make the potato soup, make the onion broth, and when you sit down to eat it, remember the person who once stood alone in a cold kitchen, stirring a single pot, cooking something simple but proper, because they believed they were worth the effort. 2. Shin of beef stew. Shin of beef was never the glamorous cut. It was tough, full of sinew, and cheap because it demanded patience. But patience was something pensioners often had. Placed into a heavy pot with an onion, a carrot, maybe a potato, and covered with water, it simmered gently for hours. Slowly, the tough fiber softened. The collagen melted into gelatin. The broth thickened into something glossy and rich without adding anything extra. One small piece could stretch across 4 days. Monday it was stew. Tuesday the cold jelly was spread on bread. Wednesday it was reheated with fresh vegetables. By Thursday, the pot was empty. It was transformation. 3. Mutton broth. A scrag end of mutton, the cheapest cut the butcher offered, went into the pot with pearl barley and whatever root vegetables were on hand. 3 hours of slow simmering turned cloudy water into a deep, pearly broth. The barley swelled and thickened everything. The vegetables softened into the background, and the mutton released a flavor far stronger and more complex than lamb. This wasn't a quick meal. It required time, not skill. But in return, it delivered warmth that lasted for days. For someone living alone, it was the closest thing to a Sunday roast without the effort of one. 4. Kakaliki soup. Chicken pieces, often just wings or bony scraps, simmered gently with leeks and a small handful of prunes. At first, it sounded unusual, but as the soup cooked, the prunes dissolved into the broth, adding a subtle sweetness that balanced the savory depth of the chicken. The leeks softened into silk. The chicken meat slipped from the bone. It could feed one person for 3 days, improving each time it was reheated. It was resourceful cooking at its finest, turning scraps into something deeply comforting. 5. Kedgeree for one. A single fillet of smoked haddock, gently poached and flaked, stirred into warm rice with a chopped boiled egg and a knob of butter. The fish flavored the entire dish. The egg added richness. The rice stretched everything into a generous portion. It felt substantial without being heavy. Kedgeree carried echoes of another era, but in post-war Britain it became practical solo cooking. One pot, under 20 minutes, a meal that felt like more than the sum of its parts. 6. Liver and onions. Liver was affordable and incredibly nourishing. Sliced thin and fried quickly with onions in one pan, it became tender if handled carefully. The onions caramelized and sweetened, balancing the strong, earthy flavor of the liver. Rich in iron and protein, it was often recommended for those feeling run down. It wasn't delicate food. It was bold, direct, and sustaining, and it required almost nothing beyond a frying pan and good timing. 7. baked beans on toast. Simple, reliable, nearly universal. A tin of baked beans heated in a saucepan and poured generously over thick toast. During rationing and tight times, it remained one of the most affordable hot meals available. It was filling, warm, and required no planning. For many elderly people, it was the dependable fallback, the meal that was always there when energy was low and cupboards were thin. Hot, soft, satisfying. 8. Bubble and squeak. This was thrift turned into tradition. Leftover cabbage, potatoes, carrots, whatever remained from previous meals were chopped and fried together in a pan until crisp at the edges. The name came from the sound it made while cooking. Nothing was wasted. Yesterday's vegetables became today's supper. The hot pan transformed soft leftovers into something textured and flavorful. It was proof that good cooking isn't always about new ingredients. Sometimes it's about using what you already have. 9. Stewed apples. Bramley apples peeled, sliced, and cooked down slowly with a spoonful of sugar and a splash of water. As they softened, they collapsed into a thick, gently sweet puree. It could be eaten warm on its own, spooned over porridge, or paired with custard for something more comforting. A single pound of apples could last nearly a week. It kept well, reheated easily, and filled the kitchen with a soft, sweet smell that made an empty house feel less empty. 10. Scottish broth. Pearl barley, lamb neck, carrots, turnip, leeks, all into one pot. Simmered slowly for 2 hours until the barley swelled and the meat fell apart. The broth thickened naturally as the grains absorbed liquid. It was hearty enough to feel like a full dinner in a single bowl. In Scotland and the north of England, it was often made at the start of the week and eaten over several days, growing thicker and richer each time it was reheated. It wasn't flashy. It was dependable.
11. Sardines on toast. A tin of sardines, usually in tomato sauce, tipped into a small saucepan and warmed gently, poured over thick toast in a bowl. The toast soaked up the sauce and softened almost like dumplings. The sardines broke into rich, salty flakes. Cheap, at around 5 pence a tin, they were quietly powerful food, rich in oils and calcium, though few used those words back then. Quick to prepare, deeply satisfying, surprisingly nourishing. 12. Rice pudding on the hob. 2 tablespoons of pudding rice stirred into a pint of milk and simmered slowly for half an hour. As it cooked, the milk thickened and the rice softened, turning creamy without needing cream. A spoon of sugar, a touch of nutmeg if available. It was gentle, warm, and soothing, the kind of meal eaten from the saucepan itself when no one else was around. Stirring it slowly on a quiet evening felt almost meditative. 13. Tripe and milk. Tripe, gently simmered in milk with sliced onions until both were tender and mild. In Lancashire towns like Bolton and Wigan, it remained popular well into the 1950s. Pensioners queued at tripe shops for their weekly portion. The milk softened its flavor, creating a simple, easily digested dish that suited older stomachs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was comforting to those who grew up with it. 1 pot, 1 plate, 1 steady routine. 14. Oxtail. Oxtail was once inexpensive because it required long cooking. Simmered slowly with onions and carrots for 3 hours, it released gelatin that transforms the broth into something glossy and rich. As it cooled, it almost set like jelly. The meat slipped from the bone effortlessly. 1 tail could stretch across 3 days of meals. It delivered depth of flavor that modern shortcuts rarely match. It was luxury born from patience. 15. Leek and potato soup. Leeks sliced thin, potatoes diced small, simmered together in water and mashed lightly. In Wales during the 1960s, this was one of the most common soups made in small households. It was inexpensive, filling, and improved with each reheating. The leeks melted into softness. The potatoes thickened everything naturally. A knob of butter at the end if available. Simple ingredients, deep comfort. A pot that could carry someone gently through 2 quiet days. 16. Corned beef hash. 1 tin of corned beef, 2 potatoes, 1 onion, diced and fried together until crisp at the edges. Perhaps a splash of Worcestershire sauce, eaten straight from the pan. The crispy bits at the bottom were treasured. Cheap, filling, dependable. 17. Cauliflower cheese soup. When cauliflower was cheap, 4 pence a head, it was boiled until tender, then enriched with grated cheese, a sprinkle of mustard powder if available. Creamy without cream, nutritious without fuss. Even the stalks went in, nothing wasted. Cheese and brassicas together form a complete protein, though grandmothers knew it instinctively, not scientifically. 18. Pea and ham soup. The most common of all, a ham bone, sometimes just 3 pence, with dried split peas, onion, carrot, and water, simmered for 2 hours until thick enough for a spoon to stand upright. This single meal delivered protein, fiber, and lasting energy. One bone could flavor 3 batches. It reheated beautifully and tasted better each day. For many, the slow bubbling pot felt like company in an otherwise quiet house. 19. Tinned tomato stew. 1 tin of tomatoes, 1 onion, 1 potato, a pinch of sugar. Simmer 25 minutes until thick and soft. Add macaroni if desired. Tinned tomatoes cost about 5 pence in the mid-1950s and kept for months. For pensioners with limited mobility, they were reliable cupboard staples. The stew was surprisingly satisfying, sweet, starchy, filling. 20. Red lentils with bacon. A small end cut of bacon, 1 cup of red lentils, water to cover. Simmer for 40 minutes. The lentils dissolved into a thick, smoky porridge. The bacon flavored everything and could be shredded back into the pot. District nurses in the Northeast recommended this meal because it delivered protein, iron, fiber, and B vitamins in one bowl. A bag of lentils cost 6 pence and lasted 2 weeks. Leftovers set firm and could be sliced and fried the next day. 21. Egg drop broth. When a cold was coming on, this was the remedy. Boiling water, a crumbled stock cube, a beaten egg poured in slowly while stirring. The egg formed silky ribbons instantly. Maybe a few sliced spring onions, a shake of white pepper. 5 minutes, about 3 pence. It felt too simple to even call cooking, yet it nourished and soothed like something far grander. 22. Potato soup. 3 potatoes, 1 onion, water, salt, pepper. Peel, dice, soften the onion in dripping. Add potatoes and water, simmer until tender, mash roughly in the pot. A splash of milk if available. Cost about 4 pence. 2 generous bowls. For someone living on just over 2 pounds a week in 1955, this was foundational cooking. Made Monday, reheated Tuesday, finished Wednesday. Plain, yes, but deeply warming and reliable. 25. Bread and milk. The simplest meal on the list, and perhaps the most honest. When energy was low and the cupboard nearly empty, supper was torn bread soaked in warm milk with a sprinkle of sugar. Half a pint of milk heated gently in a saucepan. 2 thick slices of bread torn by hand. Warm milk poured over. A pinch of nutmeg if available. A teaspoon of sugar if not. It cost less than 3 pence. It took 3 minutes. By the 1950s, the National Food Survey recorded bread and milk appearing as an evening meal in nearly 1 in 5 elderly households. It was soft, warm, easy to digest, and required just 1 saucepan and 1 bowl. Doctors quietly approved of it for patients recovering from illness because the combination of carbohydrates and protein released energy slowly through the night. Today we might call it basic. Back then, it was comfort in its purest form.